You're listening to the VBMA Podcast.
Hi there, and welcome to the VBMA Podcast, this episode being entitled Student Debt, the Ins and Outs. My name is Doug Ferry, and I'm currently serving as the 2023 National Marketing Director, and I'm a fourth-year veterinary student at Texas A&M, and I'll be the host for this episode. Before diving into the content of today's episode, I'd like to first tell you about three of our loyal sponsors, Nationwide, VBMA Family, and Purina, who have made this episode possible. For almost 20 years, Nationwide has been honored to stand as a founding sponsor of the VBMA. Their goal is to help provide relevant educational content to empower aspiring veterinarians to take a holistic approach to pet healthcare and meet pet families where they are. The AVMA is your association. Whether you're looking for professional resources or no-cost insurance options for SAVMA members, the AVMA family of AVMA and AVMA Trust have your back. Purina Pro Plan Veterinary Diets and Supplements is a proud partner of veterinary professionals. Visit purinaforprofessionals.com to learn more. We are very appreciative of these sponsors here at the VBMA and express a sincere thank you for their continued support. Today, we are so excited to have with us our guest speaker, Dr. Rebecca Mears. Dr. Mears, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Doug. I'm really excited to join you today. Really just happy to be here and share some of the ins and outs that I know about student debt.
Yes, well, we're very excited to hear your insights. First, I'd like to tell our listeners a little bit about you. So, Dr. Mears is a graduate of the University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine. She started her career as an equine practitioner and is now putting her non-clinical interests to work with the Veterinary Information Network, or VIN, student team, and the VIN Foundation Student Debt Education team. She is passionate about giving back to the profession and improving the lives of veterinarians, pre-veterinary, and veterinary students. Now, might I add, Dr. Mears has also been a longtime supporter of the VBMA. While attending veterinary school at Georgia, she was a member of her local chapter and actually served as the events coordinator on the executive team there. She later then served as the National Business Certificate Program Director and did wonderful work during her time on the national board. So thank you so much for all of the wonderful work that you have done, both in the profession and also as a veterinary student.
Thanks, Doug. I really have enjoyed my experience in veterinary medicine, and especially with the VBMA. I always tell people I've done a lot of crazy things in my life. Ask me about writing resources sometimes. But I really think that the VBMA and the experience that I had there was absolutely a standout in not only like my career in veterinary medicine and being a vet student, but honestly, my life. It's been one of the best things that I've ever done. And I always encourage, especially students, to take part in VBMA because it gives you so much in your career and in your life.
Well, I'm glad that the VBMA has such an impact on you, and we definitely hope that it continues to do so for current members and future members, and that we can pave the way for their future success as well. Well, man, we are very lucky to have you with us today. We are going to address student debt and share insights on how we might help those who are considering entering veterinary medicine, those who are currently veterinary students, and those who are recent graduates and working as doctors, and those that are still navigating their student debt repayment circumstances. So we hope that the insights today are beneficial to a variety of individuals that are listening. Tell us a little bit more, Dr. Mears, about how you got into the field of student debt repayment.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially because when you start vet school, I don't think it was ever on my radar about going into student debt education. I was a later decision to go to vet school. I was actually adamant when I was the age that most people go to vet school at. I was adamant that I would not go to vet school. So it was a very unusual path to have gotten me there. And so when I did make the decision that that's what I wanted to do, cost was at the forefront of my mind. I already had student debt from undergrad. I unfortunately even had to take out some private loans for undergrad as well. So I was already starting off with a fair bit of student debt, even when I started to look at vet school in general. So for me, I definitely prioritized where am I able to go to vet school with the least cost, because I'm going to end up with a fair bit of student debt. And I do. I have about $250,000 worth of student debt that I am managing and trying to live life at the same time. So that's how it came up for me, was my own personal interest. And then when I ended up in vet school, and even in practice, I absolutely love the medicine is fantastic, but I found I really love vet students and veterinarians. Like I just found that was something that I really enjoyed working with my colleagues and being able to help my colleagues. And I understand how stressful student debt can be. And that's a big part of what goes on in our life. And so being able to get back to the profession and help animals by helping the people that help them has really been really rewarding for me.
Wow, what a journey. And it's so cool that you have taken your personal experiences and utilize them to help bless these people that you care so much about, veterinary students and veterinarians. And yes, that was definitely a consideration of mine going into veterinary medicine, the reality of the cost of the education for veterinary school and trying to be wise with my financial decisions. So that definitely is a huge consideration that people make. And we're thankful to have you here with us to help those who are in that stage of their career and those who are continuing to navigate the realities of the financial side of veterinary medicine. So obviously, student debt is real. It is a part of many people's experiences in this field. So let's talk a little bit more about the details of student debt. There is an exorbitant amount of student debt at play right now. Tell us more about some of the numbers that we are seeing at this time.
Yeah, so student debt, I mean, it is, you're right. It's 100%. It's something that a lot of us deal with. The number of veterinary graduates that graduate without student debt is often between 15 to 20%. It fluctuates a little bit from year to year. But for the rest of us, student debt is a real thing. And it's a big consideration in our careers and our lives. So if you exclude those people who don't graduate with student debt, and you just look at those of us that do, you're looking at about $180,000 is the average number. Now we're all smart people, right? So we know where averages come from. Some people graduate with more and some people graduate with less. That often depends on where you've gone to school and some of the choices that you've made. But yeah, for most of us, like I said, for myself, it was about between undergrad and vet school, it was about $250,000. So I ended up a little bit higher in that range. It's not uncommon for me to see veterinary students that graduate with 300, $400,000 worth of student debt just from vet school alone, depending on where they went to school or anything like that. So for our pre-vet students that might be listening in, school choice, definitely start thinking about cost sooner rather than later. It's really hard to turn down a letter of acceptance once you've got it in your hand because you've realized, oh, this school is very expensive.
Yes, considering the cost was also part of my story as well. And it's very important to be able to crunch the numbers to look at what numbers are associated with these acceptance letters. How much is my in-state offering? Are there out-of-state schools that have accommodations for non-resident students? Those are very, very important things to consider because we have to take into consideration how much we are going to be making after we graduate, once we are in the workforce. So tell us about the average starting income of veterinarians today.
Absolutely. Yeah. For any pre-vet students that are joining, unfortunately, many veterinarians will tell you that we don't quite make what people seem to think we make as in our careers. So for the most recent numbers I have is the class of 2022, so those that graduated last year, and they started off for those going into private practice. they had an average starting income of about $114,000, which I mean is higher even than when I had graduated, which wasn't all that long ago. So we definitely saw during COVID how those average starting incomes came up. Here we are. We're recording this in late October 2023, and we'll see what happens with the world and inflation and a possible recession that keeps seeming to be predicted. They say that veterinary medicine is a very recession proof area. We'll see how that kind of plays out and what that does for starting salaries as well. Are we going to see those plateau if we do see that inflation keeps being the issue that it is and everything? So it's definitely something that comes into play when you're looking at how to repay your student debt. Is what is that student debt to income ratio that you have soon after graduation?
Tell us more about the different types of debt, how student debt relates to other forms of debt.
That's a great question. For many of us, our student debt is one of the highest debt amounts that we'll see in our lifetimes, right? Honestly, it's more than my house was. So my student debt is the highest amount of debt that I have currently. But your student debt, federal student debt, is different than other more traditional types of debt. And so that really comes into the repayment options that you have as well. And so we'll talk a lot through this session today about income driven repayment plans, which is something that's available to those with federal student debt. Private student loans are different, right? Those are a different beast. But for federal student loans, you do have those options. And the income driven repayment plans, I feel, get a bad rep sometimes, but those can be really helpful, especially to veterinarians and those of us that graduate with higher student debt to income ratios than what the financial professionals say is a healthy debt to income ratio. With those plans, your monthly student loan payment is set based on your income and family size. As you make more money, your student loan payment goes up, but it's always based on a portion of your income. You pay that for a maximum repayment time, depending on the plan you're using, whether it be 20 or 25 years. And then if there's a remaining balance at that time, you reach student loan forgiveness. That forgiven amount is potentially taxable. So we always talk about planning for forgiveness, right? So making sure that you're setting money aside and earning interest on that amount, that you're reaching that target goal by the time that you reach that forgiveness date. But that's something that goes into your student debt repayment strategy. I find that because that student debt is often one of the highest debt amounts that we see, it's very easy to focus on it and say, oh, I have to get out from under this student debt, but not realizing that there are some flexibilities with that. And maybe pouring extra money into your student debt isn't the best strategy for you and your family and your career. So it really is an important thing to understand. What are the options that you have for your student loan repayment strategy? And how does that play into your overall financial wellness? Not just saying, this is a big number, I don't like it, I want it to go away. Really making sure that you're making the best choices for yourself, your family, your finances, to say, what is the most appropriate strategy for me?
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing here is that when we are considering our finances, we need to consider what is the ratio between our student debt and our income. And then based off of that, we repay our student debt on an income-driven repayment pattern. And to avoid the thought process of, I need to pay all this off right now. This number needs to be zero, needs to be gone. But to avoid that and consider how there is an opportunity to have forgiveness, to see for us what that timetable might be, and then in the meantime, to still live, to consider what would be the most advantageous approach to my personal funding, of placing the funds that I do have into other aspects of life while I am paying the minimum requirement of my income-driven repayment. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you're on the right track there. So I can use myself as an example here to illustrate, right? I've got a fair bit of student debt. I am not at a student debt to income ratio of 1 by any means, right? Like many veterinarians, I am not making $250,000 a year. And so for me, the best choice was to use income driven repayment and plan for forgiveness. So I graduated into the pandemic. So that was an interesting time for many reasons. And I am actually just now starting to repay on my student loans because of the pandemic forbearance, and interest was set to 0% for the last 3.5 years and $0 payment. I actually still have a $0 student loan payment because I had consolidated my student loans after graduation and used recent tax return that showed I had no income to document my income and have a $0 payment. So my payment is actually starting back up at $0, and I'll be able to benefit from that for more time. And then as I update my income information next year, my payment will go up, but it's always going to be based on what my income is. If my income goes down for any reason, say I start off my career as an equine veterinarian, say I got hurt and I was out of work and I wasn't earning an income at that time, I could update my income information sooner to have my payment adjusted down to reflect the income I may or may not be earning at that time. So that's a little bit of that flexibility there. And I am planning for forgiveness, right? I'm assuming that I will owe a tax on that forgiven amount at the end of my maximum repayment period. And so I use like a robo advisor, just one of those online things, to have a little investment account, and I put money into it each month. And I just let that grow over time to prepare for that potential tax, right? That way I'm not taken by surprise when that day comes. I've been making efforts to prepare for that. So that's my strategy. That for me is going to cost me the least amount of money over time, but it's also going to allow me to do other things while I'm repaying my student loan, right? I did buy a house for my dog. I am a millennial that bought a house for my dog. I did not want that, but he has it now. I just had to buy a new car, right? I was that person that I've been telling everyone that I needed a car in another 2 years. And then that went on for about 7 years before it finally caught up to me. So I had to do that, right? I want to travel. Maybe you want to have a family. Maybe you want to start a practice. Having that cash flow, having that financial flexibility to be able to focus on you, your life, your family, while also repaying your student loans can be really helpful.
So what I'm hearing is that these are not two exclusive circumstances. They inform each other, but one is not domineering. You can have your strategy for having your student loans paid off with time, but you can still live. You can still experience life. You can still find the opportunities you would like to in all these different categories that you mentioned. And you can find joy and peace and fulfillment while you are still being wise in repaying these student loans that you previously took out. So this is a large conversation about fourth year veterinary students or those that are currently paying off their student loans. And you said something interesting. You talked about a strategy of your taxes. So what I'm gathering is that you want to file your taxes strategically so that the amount that you are expected to pay back is informed by that tax return. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a confusing concept because it's not something we do for other things, right? That is something unique to our student debt. So I think it's often easiest to start with fourth year students, right? So that spring before you graduate, even though you may have not earned any money that last year because you were on clinics, you were a busy vet student, or maybe you earned very little money, still file a tax return. Because having that adjusted gross income, the AGI from your tax return, being very low or even $0, you can use that AGI to document your income for these income driven repayment plans. So if you have a $0 AGI, that's going to help you to secure a $0 per month student loan payment for at least the first 12 months of repayment. Then let's say you're in a traditional US vet school. You graduate May, June-ish. Maybe you take a little bit of time off. You start your job July, August. So during the rest of that year, you're only earning about half of your annual income. And so that following spring, when you file taxes again, your AGI would reflect about half, depending on when you graduate, of your income. So that's going to help you to, when you use that number to document your income, update it again the next year, because you do have to update your income at least annually, sooner if your income decreases. But when you have that about a half a year's AGI, your next 12 months of repayment is probably going to have a pretty low monthly student loan payment as well. So now we're at like 2 years where you've probably had a low or $0 payment. Let's say you do an internship or a residency and you're not making much money at all. Throughout your internship and residency, you could be repaying your student loans using these income-driven repayment plans with a $0 or a really low monthly payment during that, earning time towards student loan forgiveness, right? But also making sure that you're able to pay rent, that you're able to pay for groceries, all of those things. Now, let's say you're a veterinarian in repayment, right? You're a couple of years out. We often start first with your AGI to document your income using those income-driven repayment plans. It's typically the most easiest and straightforward way to do that, but there are some other options if for some reason, let's say you took a new job and got a really high sign-on bonus, and that's reflected in your AGI from the previous year, but that's not what you're currently making. There are some other options there for alternate income documentation, but by large and far, your AGI, that recent tax return, is often the first place I go to look to say, is that the best way to document your income each year for that?
Cool. No, that helps us so much to understand the relationship between AGI and when you are filing your tax returns and how that informs your income-driven repayment plan and the amount that you need to pay at a given time, and to have some room to breathe while you're trying to establish yourself right out of school. So that's really helpful. Another thought that I have is connected to what you just said about sign-on bonuses. So currently, there are a lot of offers out there for fourth-year veterinary students, or even before that, before you're even in your fourth year, when you're even thinking highly about different contract negotiation experiences, et cetera. There are employers out there that are offering these really attractive sign-on bonuses. Tell us more about your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, so it is interesting to follow the sort of hiring and benefit trends as they happen throughout the years. So there's a couple of things that we're seeing that relate to student debt. As you mentioned, sign-on bonuses, right? And are big. Some of those are very big numbers. The other thing that I'll see sometimes are monthly employer contributions towards your student loans. Both of those, I definitely want anyone looking at those to go in eyes wide open. So let's start with the sign-on bonuses first. Like I said, those can often be pretty big numbers. Those can often have what you might hear as clawback clauses as well. So if you were to leave that job within a certain period of time, you may owe some or all of that back to the company. So you want to make sure that, unfortunately, if maybe that job doesn't work out or another opportunity comes up, that you're able to do that. So I often tell people in those situations, take that money, put it in like a high yield savings account or something that like accrues interest, a safe place for it to go, and leave that money there until you start passing those deadlines. So let's say 6 months in, you know that half of that money is yours. At that point, you would not owe any of that back. Once you pass that 6 month deadline, sure, then start considering other things to do with that money. I don't often recommend throwing it towards your student loans because so many of us are going to benefit from income driven repayment and reaching student loan forgiveness. Really, the best kind of strategy in that situation is to pay the minimum as required by your income and your family size and focus on planning for that forgiveness. So instead of using that money to pay down your student loans, you need to boost your emergency fund. Could you use it to max out retirement contributions? What about a down payment for a house, right? What if you use that to really get a head start on your forgiveness planning fund for your student loan repayment strategy, right? There's other ways to use that money other than putting it towards your student loans that'll probably benefit you and your family a little bit better in the long run. Now, what about those monthly contributions from employers, right? Those are another thing. So sometimes we'll see that an employer is going to contribute $150 towards your student loan payment each month. Those can be a little interesting too. Again, if you're planning for forgiveness and projected to reach student loan forgiveness, paying extra towards your student loans really isn't that beneficial. And that's whether it's you or your employer making those contributions. So the other thing with those is they can often put your student loans into a weird paid ahead status. So it's good to understand if that's like a benefit that you can't get rid of, how that might impact your student loans. That's a little bit more for those that are in repayment versus our vet students that are joining us now. But I don't, for many of us, because like I said, so many of us, we graduate with pretty high amounts of student debt, and we probably should be focusing on paying the minimum and planning for forgiveness. Those employer contributions aren't necessarily always the most beneficial in your repayment strategy.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. That's very helpful to understand how we might navigate these sign-on bonuses or these employer contributions. And I know that every single case is different. Everybody has a unique situation, but generally those are very helpful thoughts. We have talked a lot about those that are in the repayment phase. Let's talk a little bit more about specific ways by which one might pay back their student loans. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a bunch of changes to student loan repayment
Really?
here in the last couple of years. Yeah, so I've been doing this about a year and a half full time. And I'm telling you, when I first started, it felt like every 30 days there were changes going on. And I was like, oof, I don't know that I can keep up with this, let alone practicing veterinarian or somebody that's trying to navigate being clinical practice or whatever your job is and trying to understand all of this at the same time. So there's been some really beneficial things as well. By large and far, I'm lucky enough to work with Drs. Paul Payan and Tony Bartels, who've been doing student debt repayment education for over 10 years now. And if I've heard them say it once, I've heard them say it 1,000 times about the federal student loan repayment and the income driven repayment. It just gets more beneficial over time. And we definitely have seen that in the last couple of years. For example, one of the big things that's going on that for those that have been in repayment for some time is this one-time forgiveness count adjustment, which is allowing for any time that you've been in repayment to be counted as time towards forgiveness. And that's a game changer for a lot of our veterinarians that have been in repayment for some amount of time already. So that we're just seeing more and more veterinarians, more and more people across the US reaching student loan forgiveness, whether it's through any of the programs. A couple of changes that really affect veterinarians, especially vet students. One of the things is that the pay program, which is one of the specific income driven repayment plans, it stands for pay as you earn. That plan has largely been one of the most beneficial repayment plans for those that are eligible. And it's set to phase out as of July 1, 2024. So if you're using it as of that date, you can continue to do so, but you can't sign up for it after that deadline. So if you switch away from it or you graduate later, you won't be able to sign up for pay. That's okay though. That's a shame that's going away. But for many of our veterinary students currently, you're probably also eligible for income-based repayment 2014. That's the newer version of the IBR plan. And that one's really similar to pay. We've also got a new plan. So Saving on a Valuable Education was just released earlier this year. It's actually an updated version of Repay, which was the revised pay as you earn. So they took Repay, made some changes, renamed it, and now we have the Save plan. And Save's going to be really beneficial for many veterinarians. It results in a lower monthly student loan payment because more income is protected from student loan repayment. Having a low student loan payment is generally beneficial, right? The other thing with Save is that it has what they call 100% unpaid interest subsidy. And that sounds really confusing. So let's try and break that down a little bit more.
Cool.
Let's do it in like really simple terms. So let's say that when you're in repayment, your student loans accrue interest each month. And let's say there's $1,000 of interest accrued each month on your student loans. And let's say your minimum monthly payment is only $100. So that means there's $900 worth of unpaid interest each month. Using other income-driven repayment plans, that unpaid interest is added to your total balance. It is not added to your principal. It stays in its own unpaid interest bucket. That's an area of confusion a lot of times, but it's not. You'll see your total balance grow throughout repayment with that, but it's not your principal. So you're not necessarily earning interest on interest. With Save, because there's that 100% unpaid interest subsidy, that $900 of unpaid interest is subsidized. It's not added to your total balance. So that prevents your overall student loan balance from growing throughout repayment. So Save is going to be beneficial for a lot of veterinarians. It's probably the thing that is like the biggest quote unquote downfall of Save is that it has a maximum repayment period of 25 years versus pay as you earn had one of 20 years. All right. So a lot of people get a little stuck on that extra 5 years of repayment. For those that are also eligible for IBR 2014, many of our upcoming graduates are more than likely eligible for that plan. You still have a 20-year maximum repayment plan option. So you could benefit from Save for a period of time and then switch to IBR 2014. For some people, sticking with Save, even with those extra years of repayment, is still beneficial. Honestly, your student loan repayment strategy, it changes as the world changes. It changes as your income and your family size change. So I always tell people, at least annually, check in on your student loan repayment strategy. Stay tuned with the changes that are going on. It's not a set it and forget it thing. You got to check in with things and understand how you might benefit from changes that happen in the future. So it can be a lot, but it can also be really beneficial and help save you money in the long run by checking in on these things and staying a little tuned in with the news.
Yes, it's so cool to hear about these different options that are available to us as we seek to pay back our student loans between the Save plan, the IBR 2014, the pay plan. It's going to be an individualized process for each person to determine which route they should take and if they should transition from one to another, etc. But we really appreciate you shedding light on the different components of each one and to help us understand what the opportunity is as we consider our specific needs and how we might move forward. And also, yes, to keep a pulse on where things are at with our student repayment plans on an annual basis. So thank you very much for sharing all of those thoughts. When it comes to those that are listening, this is very helpful to our fourth year students, very helpful to those that are in their repayment process. One additional question that I have for you is, what recommendations would you have for those who are earlier on in their process of student loans, those that maybe are first or second year veterinary students, so those who are pre-vet students? What thoughts would you have for that demographic?
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you asked. Because I think it's so easy, even for like pre-vets or first, second, third year students, to get stuck on repayment, when really I want those students to start thinking about what they can do now, right?
Mm.
Because I tell people all the time, once you walk across the stage, right, you're the doctor, you get the hood. At that point, your student loans are yours. Like, you don't get to give them back at that point. So I always encourage, especially current vet students, to really understand borrowing and what you need to know during that time. So for our pre-vet students, honestly, I cannot say enough to please look into the cost of the schools that you are applying to and make that a part of your decision-making process. I was an unusual case in that I was accepted to University of Georgia my first time that I applied. However, I was applying as a Delaware resident to get a contract seat, and I was number 3 on the list, and only the first 2 got contract seats. So they were like, "You can come for out-of-state tuition." And I said, "No." I was like, "I'll stay on the wait list for the contract seat, but I'm not coming for out-of-state tuition," because like we said, I already had student debt from undergrad. So it was really important to me that I keep those borrowing costs down. And that's a hard decision to make. So set yourself up for success when you're filling out FEMCAS, right? Only apply to schools that you're actually going to go to. Only apply to schools that you understand the cost of. So our first, second, even third year student, you can pay for vet school using only federal student loans. And you should pay for vet school using only federal student loans. You know, there's always this idea of private loans, and you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance at your school using federal student loans, which are going to have those flexibilities that we've been talking about, but they also just have a lot of protections in place that don't happen with private loans. So really avoid those private loans. We talked a little bit about internships and residencies before, and being able to use income driven repayment to have low student loan payments during that time. If you have private loans, they want to get paid, right? So maybe you're looking at putting your student loans in a forbearance because you can't afford your private student loan payments while you're doing advanced training or things like that. And that just, it ends up more costly for you. The other thing with federal student loans is if something were to happen to you, they go away, right? Your family's not on the line to repay those or things like that. So really avoiding those private loans is one of the best things that you can do. I always get questions from students about, what about other ways, right? Scholarships, grants. Should I work during school? All of those are great options, right? If you can handle working during vet school, go for it, right? I had to have other things to do during vet school. I couldn't solely be a vet student. It would drive me absolutely crazy. So for me, it was important to be involved in other things. Scholarships and grants, they're great options, right? It's very hard to find a scholarship that's a full ride tuition, right? Or even full ride as your total cost. So while those things might not necessarily offset a huge amount of your student debt, they can be helpful. You know, if you're working or if you get a scholarship, what should you use that money for? Right? Use it for tuition, use it for rent, groceries, you know, maybe a little bit of going out, not a crazy amount. I don't recommend going to Italy on student loans and things like that, but using it for those things to help keep your total borrowing costs lower. I always get questions from students about like, well, should I pay down interest that my student loans are accruing, or should I pay older loans? Not necessarily, really. And a big part of that is because instead of putting that money to pay down other student loans or interest on the student loans, look instead to borrow less in the future, right? So if you have that extra money that you're thinking, oh, I should use this to pay on my student loans, instead just borrow less the next semester, the next year, right? Because by large and far, our interest rates only go up over time. And so if you can borrow less of that more expensive money because of the work, the scholarships, whatever the case may be, then that can really help to make smart borrowing choices.
That is very helpful. So what I'm hearing is essentially when you are earlier on in your timetable at veterinary school to borrow wisely, have that be your Northern Star, be your guide to really understand what your needs are and to set yourself up for success in that regard as you have considered the actual cost of your education. And for those who are later on, like farther down the road, to seek your opportunities when it comes to income-driven repayment, to understand your student debt to income ratio, be very wise with employer payments and sign-on bonuses. And for those who are in the process of the repayment phase of all of this, to understand the different options before us. We have the pay repayment plan, we have the save repayment plan, we have the IBR 2014. All of these are unique and have different characteristics that can align with our specific needs as we make the very best decision for ourselves. All of these insights have been very helpful, and I hope that this provides hope for those who are listening to understand that there are options before them to be able to navigate their personal circumstances. Now, like you said earlier, this is an ever-changing conversation, and
Yes.
it is important for us to be on top of the latest and greatest to know how to be the most strategic we can as we move forward. So what are your favorite resources that you like to direct people to as they try to stay up to date on the most recent information for student debt?
Yeah, great question. Because like you said, this does oftentimes feel like it's always a moving target. But you're busy, right? You're busy being a vet student, you're busy being a veterinarian. And so it can be a lot to keep up on this. And so how do you find good, trusted information? I have a couple of favorite resources. So for current vet students, I definitely recommend signing up for the Drip.vet Personal Financial Success course. The idea of that is, learning more about these financial concepts over time, right? It's not fun to sit down and throw yourself into this necessarily and try and learn it all at one time. So instead, what the Personal Financial Success course does is it's a weekly email, whether it's a short video or a little blog post that starts to break this stuff down and makes it a little more comprehensible, right? What does budgeting look like? What does student loan repayment look like? All of those things. And so that can be really helpful, and it's free to current veterinary students. So like you can't ask for a better resource there. The other thing I really like is, of course, the VIN Foundation student debt resources. I'm really passionate about those. I'm very lucky that I'm able to work for the VIN Foundation student debt education team and help colleagues. So the VIN Foundation is the nonprofit arm of VIN. And so foundation's resources are free, regardless of if you're a VIN member or not. They're free to the veterinary community. The goal really is to help. And there are a ton of student debt resources available through VIN Foundation. So we have an area on the message boards where we talk about student loans and you can ask questions about these things. We have our WikiDebt resource, which is like a resource library that breaks down these concepts as well. You can read a little bit more about the different income-driven repayment plans, about all of those things. And then we also do blog posts and podcasts. And so we'll take the updates of what's going on in the student debt world and common questions that we hear, and we'll break those down and try and make it a little bit more comprehensible. And so that way you can better understand, what does repayment look like? What do these recent changes mean for me, right? If you're one of those veterinarians that has been at repayment for some time now, and you heard that one-time forgiveness count adjustment and you're not sure what that means and does it apply to you, we've got a blog post about it, right? And I think that's really helpful. And again, it's free and it's out there just to help the veterinary community.
Those sound like really amazing resources that I don't doubt will serve many of our listeners moving forward to know how to take their next best steps with their student loan considerations. Now, Dr. Mears, how can our listeners connect with you personally? They might have questions that they would like to bring forward to you to ask you for your guidance and help. Is that something that you would be willing to do? And if so, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always welcome to questions and talking about student debt. And for me, it is fun. It's weird. I didn't think it would ever be, but I really enjoy what I do. So the best way to contact, please do, is you can email our student debt team, and you can email us at studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. That's the easiest way to get a hold of us. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and also for your willingness to be with us today, for the nuggets of gold that you shared with us, for the insights that you brought to us. This is such an important topic. There are so many that are navigating the realities of student debt repayment and preparing for taking on student debt so that they can achieve what they would love to do within veterinary medicine. And the wisdom that you have imparted with us has been invaluable. So we want to extend a huge thank you to you from the VBMA and for your willingness to help us as we walk our walk on this journey. Thank you so very much for your time and for your sacrifice.
Yeah, no, Doug, I really appreciate it. And I mean, if there was one thing that I could leave everybody with as we wrap up here, it's just that student debt goes away. It does. Either you pay your balance to zero before you reach forgiveness, or you reach forgiveness. Either way, there's an end date to your student debt. And understanding the flexibilities around those repayment strategies and how to make them work for you can really help you to not only repay your student debt, but also live your life, take care of yourself, take care of your family, the things that are actually, really important to you, and be a great veterinarian.
I love that. That brings us so much hope and guidance, as some people might be feeling that they are drowning. And it's just a reminder that there are other things that are more important in life, and through appropriate resources and strategic plans, we can really navigate all of the realities of debt. And there is the option of moving forward successfully and being happy as we continue to fulfill our missions within veterinary medicine. So thank you so very much. And to those who have been listening, if you have enjoyed this episode here on the VBMA podcast, we invite you to go to the VBMA account on Instagram. The VBMA is the handle, and give it a follow. There you'll be able to be notified of upcoming podcast episodes that will be released. Recently, we released an episode entitled Conflict, When and How, as well as one about overcoming adversity, understanding that anything is possible to those who work hard. And in addition to this episode, we have another episode as part of the VBMA podcast, and it will be focused on the honors portfolio. Go ahead and follow the VBMA on Instagram, and in the meantime, we wish you the very best as you seek to navigate your personal needs in the financial aspects of veterinary medicine, as you seek to pay off your student debt, and as you seek to understand the options that are before you. You can do this, we can do this, and we wish the very best for you in that process. In the meantime, take care and see you around.